My name is Maelin Hart, and at 70, I believed I'd seen enough of the world to know how people worked, especially the ones I'd raised. I was wrong. Lisbon's airport gleamed like polished bone that morning, all white light and restless voices. The air smelled of coffee and jet fuel, the kind of scent that makes travelers believe they're in control of their own departures. My daughter, Raya, sat with her husband, Dre, beside Gate 17, their heads bent together over his phone. They'd been whispering all morning. I told myself it was nothing. I'd been widowed for 9 years. I filled my days with small projects, redesigning my garden, reading too late into the night, cooking for neighbors who forgot to return my dishes. When Raya suggested a family trip to Portugal, one last adventure before you settle into retirement for real, Mom, I said yes. I wanted to believe we were mending things between us. Our flight back to Chicago wasn't for another hour when I excused myself to the restroom. My knees ached from walking the hilly streets of Lisbon, but I felt oddly light, as if something in this trip had reset the air between us. I remember glancing over my shoulder. Raya smiled and waved, half distracted. Dre didn't look up. It couldn't have taken more than 5 minutes. But when I returned, the seats were empty. No luggage, no coats, just the flattened impressions where they'd been sitting. I looked around, thinking they'd gone for coffee. The boarding screen still read, Seattle connection via Chicago. I called Raya's name once, then again. Nothing. The people near me glanced up briefly, then looked away. I checked my purse for my phone gone. Wallet gone. Passport gone. A slow, cold current moved through me. Not panic, not yet. More like disbelief wearing the wrong face. I crouched, searching under the metal seats, as if I'd dropped my entire life on the floor. Announcements echoed through the terminal flights, numbers, destinations that didn't belong to me. The noise blurred until it was one long hum. My hands trembled as I held the single thing, left a small envelope with 20 euros that Raya had handed me that morning for souvenirs. I sat down in the empty row, staring at the gate sign, 17. The number seemed suddenly cruel. I whispered their names again, quietly this time, and the sound of them felt foreign in my mouth. Somewhere over the Atlantic, a plane was carrying my daughter home. And I was still here, anonymous, stripped bare by the people I loved most. I drew a long breath, straightened my back, and looked toward the bright blue sign marked Information. The floor beneath me felt steady enough to stand on. By the time I took my first step, the shock had cooled into something sharper, something that would keep me moving long after the ache set in. The woman behind the airline counter looked far too young to understand the weight of what I was asking. Her hair was sleek, her nails painted the color of confidence. The badge on her chest read, Clara B. And when she smiled, it was a polite reflex, professional, practice distant. I'm looking for my daughter, I said, my voice thinner than I expected. Raya Doyle. She and her husband were sitting with me at gate 17. I stepped away for 10 minutes. When I came back, they were gone. She typed something into her computer, her expression neutral. The click of her keyboard sounded like rain against glass. Can I have their flight numbers, ma'am? They were on my booking, I said, opening my bag automatically. Only then did I remember the bag was empty. No passport, no wallet, no phone. My fingers hovered uselessly over the fabric lining. Clara hesitated. Your boarding pass? I shook my head. Everything's gone. They had it. She turned back to the screen, fingers pausing over the keys. Her tone softened slightly. All right. Give me their last names again. I did. The silence stretched long enough for my pulse to count the seconds. Then she frowned, eyes scanning. Mrs. Hart, she said carefully. They were rebooked on an earlier flight. They left 30 minutes ago, connection through Denver. Denver. The word left my mouth like a cough. We live in Chicago. I understand. It looks like they switched destinations at the desk. I'm sorry. The floor seemed to tilt. I steadied myself on the counter, the laminate cool under my hand. I wanted to argue to tell her it was a mistake, but deep down, something cold and certain clicked into place. They hadn't left me behind by accident. Clara kept talking, explaining rebooking policies, but her voice faded beneath the rush in my ears. I caught fragments: standby upgrade, separate ticketing, nothing we can do. When she asked if I wanted to file a report, I nodded. She handed me a printed form and a cheap plastic pen. My handwriting wavered across the paper: passports, stolen phones, stolen personal items missing. She took it back and offered a small nod of sympathy that didn't reach her eyes. Walking away, I counted what I had left. A $20 bill, slightly wrinkled, tucked in the side pocket of my jacket. No cards, no identification, no keys. The arithmetic of survival was simple and cruel. I sat again at gate 17, the same seat where Raya had laughed that morning, talking about the color of Lisbon's rooftops. My hands clenched around the 20 as if it could anchor me. The first tear came quietly. Then another. I wasn't a woman who cried easily, not when my husband died, not even at his funeral. But this felt different. There's no ceremony for being erased by your own child. People walked past, dragging suitcases, scrolling their phones, glancing up at the departure screens. To them, I was just another tired traveler, waiting too long for a flight. No one saw that my life had just been reduced to a single bill and a name without proof. When the tears stopped, I wiped my face on the sleeve of my cardigan and sat still until the noise around me sharpened again. A man's suitcase bumped my knee as he passed, and the small jolt pulled me back into myself. I folded the 20, carefully slipped it into my pocket, and stood. Somewhere between disbelief and rage, something steadier was beginning to take shape, a kind of discipline I hadn't needed in years. I adjusted the strap of my empty bag, squared my shoulders, and walked toward the nearest sign marked information. My hands were shaking, but my steps were sure. Whatever they thought they'd taken from me, they hadn't taken that. The security officer at the airport directed me to a small, windowless room behind customs, a place that smelled faintly of metal polish and exhaustion. There was a phone mounted to the wall, the kind people use when they've run out of options. A printed card above it read U.S. Consular Agency, Lisbon Assistance Line. I pressed the number with fingers that wouldn't quite hold still. 10 minutes later, a voice answered, calm and direct. "This is Officer Amina Caro. Tell me where you are." Her tone didn't ask for apologies. It carried a quiet competence that steadied me. Within the hour, a car from the consulate arrived, an aging sedan with faded embassy plates. The driver offered water, and I realized I hadn't drunk anything since morning. The consular building was tucked into a side street near the river. Nothing grand, just beige concrete, 2 flags, and a security checkpoint that felt both humiliating and safe. Inside, the air conditioning was too strong, the walls lined with posters about travel safety that now felt like cruel jokes. Amina Caro appeared from behind a desk stacked with folders. She was in her 40s, tall, with skin the color of roasted coffee, and a posture that made every movement deliberate. Her handshake was firm, but not cold. "Ms. Hart, let's get you seated." I told her everything: the trip, the gate, the empty seats, the missing passport. She didn't interrupt, only made small notes in tidy looping handwriting. When I faltered, she handed me a tissue without a word. "So your daughter and son-in-law left without notice," she said finally. "Yes." The word caught. "They changed their flight. Took my things. Everything." She exhaled slowly, her gaze steady. "That's more than theft." I waited for her to add a label: betrayal, maybe, but she didn't. Instead, she reached into a drawer and pulled out a form. "We'll file an official report with the Portuguese authorities first. Then I can authorize an emergency passport. It takes 3 business days. 3 days." The phrase dropped like a stone. "Where will I stay?" There's a list of hostels we work with. Some take consular referrals. I can also arrange a small cash voucher to cover essentials until the replacement document is ready. Her efficiency left little room for despair. We went through each question. Full name, date of birth, last U.S. address, point of contact, back home. Each answer felt like stitching myself back together, thread by thread. When she finished typing, she turned the monitor so I could see. Please review before I submit. I scanned the text. It was strange to see my life reduced to black and white paragraphs. Senior citizen abandoned by relatives. All personal effects stolen. No ongoing medical conditions. Cognitively alert. My throat tightened. Is that how it looks to the government? Just another case. Amina's eyes met mine. It's how it looks on paper. But off paper, you're still here. I must have looked unconvinced because she leaned forward slightly. Listen, Ms. Hart, you're not broken. You're angry. Angry people find their way home. It wasn't said like comfort. It was instruction, an acknowledgement that I still had choices. She gave me a slip of paper with her direct number and a small packet containing a toothbrush soap and a prepaid calling card. Before I left, she walked me to the door. Someone once told me the hardest part isn't losing things, she said. It's remembering you're still the same person without them. Outside, the afternoon had turned to gold. Cars hummed along the waterfront, their reflections rippling across the Tagus River. I stood there for a while, feeling the paper bag of toiletries crinkle in my hand. The city was loud and alive, and I was a shadow walking through it, but at least I was moving. I followed the map she'd drawn to a nearby hostel every step, deliberate, measured. 3 days, I thought. Just 3 days. Then I'd go home. Whatever waited there, I wouldn't face it, as the woman who'd been left behind at Gate 17. I'd face it as the woman who walked out of Lisbon with nothing and kept walking anyway. The hostel Amina arranged was clean, but sparse. 6 bunks, 1 flickering lamp, and a single window that opened to the sound of mopeds along Rua de São Paulo. For the first night, I hardly slept. The metal frame creaked each time I turned, and the faces of my daughter and her husband floated in the dark above me, clear as daylight. I replayed their smiles at breakfast, the easy way Raya had said, "Don't forget to buy the local honey before we leave," as if she hadn't already planned to leave me behind. By morning, the shock had cooled into calculation. I took out Amina's list of assistance programs and followed it to a small consular credit office 2 streets away. There, a man named Eduardo, kind eyes, salt and pepper hair, verified my documents and tapped on a keyboard until the printer hummed. "Emergency travel fund approved," he said, sliding me a voucher. "It covers the flight back to Chicago. You'll pay it back when you're ready." The word ready caught me off guard. I didn't feel ready for anything. But I signed the form, my hand steady. The ticket agent at the airport frowned when she saw my temporary passport. "You've had quite a week," she said softly. I didn't answer. She printed my boarding pass and handed it to me, as if it were a fragile thing. My flight left at dawn. The terminal was still half asleep, lights dimmed to an amber glow. I kept my head down at security, wearing the same cardigan I'd had since Lisbon, the only one left to me. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon pastries from a nearby cafe, sweet and unreal. Once seated on the plane, I exhaled, for what felt like the first time in days. A Portuguese family filled the row ahead, their children bouncing on their seats, too young to know that the world could shift under your feet without warning. I turned to the window, where the wing cut clean through the fog. As the plane lifted, Lisbon shrank beneath me, its tiled roofs, its cobblestone alleys, the hotel balcony where Raya had once taken a photograph of us, smiling. I closed my eyes until the image faded. Somewhere over the Atlantic, the clouds thickened, endless and soft, like miles of unspoken apologies. My reflection in the window looked older than I remembered, but not weaker. I whispered to it quietly, "They think I'm gone, The hum of the engines filled the silence. The sentence lingered like a promise, heavier than grief, lighter than rage. I reached into the small travel pouch Eduardo had given me. Inside were copies of every form Amina had filed: theft report, passport request, emergency travel authorization. Each sheet stamped, signed, dated. Proof that I still existed somewhere in the system. Proof that I could rebuild myself piece by piece. As we crossed into night, I unfolded one of the pages and studied the black ink under the cabin's dim light. My name looked ordinary there, Maelin Hart, but to me it glowed like evidence. By the time the seatbelt sign lit for descent, I already knew what I would do. Raya believed she'd bought herself time days, maybe weeks, to take what wasn't hers. She didn't know I was coming home early. She didn't know I still had enough left to fight. I watched the ocean turn to dark blue beneath the clouds, the edge of the world slowly giving way to home. Evanston looked smaller when I returned, as if distance had folded it inward. The cab from O'Hare rolled past the familiar street's elm trees, arching over sidewalks' porch lights, already glowing in the dusk. I hadn't told anyone I was coming home. It felt safer that way. The driver slowed as we turned onto Ravine Street, where my house sat near the end of the block. The craftsman porch, the pale blue siding, the copper mailbox my husband once polished every spring, it all looked the same, but the air around it felt wrong, emptied of its pulse. I paid the fare, thanked the driver, and stood on the curb with my small travel bag. The front windows were dark. No car in the drive. For a moment, I wondered if Raya had already sold the car too. The sound of a rake against gravel made me turn. Kellen Troop, my neighbor of nearly 20 years, straightened from his yard. He was still lean, still tanned from his summer gardening, his silver hair catching the last of the daylight. A retired history teacher, methodical, polite, the kind of man who never forgot the small details of a story. He blinked, then smiled slowly. Maelin, well, I'll be damned. You're back early. Early, I tried to match his tone. Wasn't aware there was a schedule. Kellen rested his hands on the rake's handle. Raya told me you'd extended your trip a few weeks. Said you were enjoying Lisbon too much to come home yet. The words hung there, careful, but uneasy. Did she now? I said softly. He hesitated, studying my face. Something's wrong, isn't it? Something, I admitted. I'm still figuring out how much. He looked toward my house the way a man does when he wants to tell a truth without forcing it. Maelin. I didn't want to interfere, but 3, maybe 4 days ago I saw a moving van in your driveway. Early morning, before most of the neighborhood was awake. I felt my pulse throb in my neck. A van. He nodded. Big one. 2 men carrying boxes out. I waved to Raya, but she didn't wave back. She seemed, how do I say it? Focused. Tense, like someone racing a clock. My mouth went dry. Dre was there too. Yes. He was at the door giving directions. I assumed you'd approved it. Figured you were clearing out the basement or doing one of your reorganizing projects. He smiled faintly, remembering. You were always the one with lists. I looked across the yard at my front door, the brass handle glinting under the porch light. The house seemed to be holding its breath. What time was this? 6:30, maybe earlier. I remember because the streetlights were just going out. They loaded fast. No labels on the boxes. He paused, lowering his voice. Something about it didn't sit right. But you know how it is, we tell ourselves we're overthinking things. I didn't want to pry. You did the right thing, I said, though. My throat felt tight. You couldn't have known. Kellen studied me a moment longer, then leaned his rake against the fence. If you need anything, I'm right next door. And, Maelin, you might want to check your locks, just in case. The evening air carried the smell of cut grass and the faint hum of cicadas. I nodded, unable to speak, and turned toward my porch. My hand trembled as I fished for the spare key beneath the ceramic planter. It was still there, cold and gritty. The key slid into the lock, but the door stuck before giving way with a slow creak. Inside, the silence felt wrong too, even too arranged. Dust floated in the air like tiny witnesses. Behind me, Kellen's rake scraped once more against the gravel, then stopped. I closed the door quietly and leaned against it, my breath steadying. Whatever had happened while I was gone, the house knew it. And now, so did I. The first step into my house felt like trespassing. The air was stale, holding none of the soft scent of lavender I used to keep by the windowsill. Even the light seemed wrong, dull or hesitant, as if it no longer recognized me. Dust floated where sunbeams should have been. I left my bag by the door and walked into the living room. The rug had been rolled halfway back, and a square patch of floor where the piano used to stand gaped like a pulled tooth. My husband's grandfather clock, the one that had marked every dinner and Christmas morning, was gone. So were the silver picture frames from the mantel. Only faint outlines remained on the wall where they had hung pale ghosts of memory. In the dining room, I found the china cabinet half empty. The family silver goblets, spoons, the engraved serving tray, with my initials, had vanished. My reflection in the glass was small and unfamiliar. I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to. Grief blurred details, and details were what I needed now. Across the yard, a movement caught my eye. Kellen stood at his window, not watching, but waiting. When I stepped outside and waved, he crossed the lawn, immediately rake still in hand, like an excuse. "I thought you might need a phone," he said, offering his own. "Use mine to take pictures. Evidence if anything's missing." I nodded. "Everything's missing." We started in the living room. I photographed empty shelves, open drawers, the hollow space beneath the staircase where boxes of my late husband's journals once sat. Kellen followed silently, noting dates, locations, and descriptions in the small spiral notebook he always kept in his shirt pocket. He approached this like a lesson plan. Quiet precision, no wasted words. Upstairs, my bedroom looked untouched until I opened the top drawer of the dresser. The jewelry box lay open, lined with crushed blue velvet, and nothing else. The gold bracelet Raya had once begged to wear at her high school prom was gone. So was the locket from my mother, the one that held a single lock of hair from the daughter I thought I knew. The sight of that empty box made my knees give slightly. I steadied myself on the dresser's edge. Kellen's voice was gentle. "You should probably call the police." "Not yet," I said. "Let me see everything first." We moved to my study at the back of the house, the one room Raya rarely entered. The curtains were half drawn, the desk cleared, except for a manila folder placed neatly in the center. The arrangement was too deliberate, almost a message. I sat down the chair, groaning beneath me, and opened it. Inside were several notarized pages. The first bore a bold header in black ink, "Deed of Gift." The lines blurred for a moment before settling into legibility. Grantor Maelin Hart. Grantee Raya Doyle. Consideration, love, and affection. My hand trembled as I flipped through the next pages. Official stamps. Notary seal my own signature at the bottom, dated 3 weeks ago. "That's not possible," I whispered. Kellen leaned closer, his brow furrowing. "That's your name." "Yes, but I never signed this." The room tilted slightly. I remembered Raya sitting beside me one afternoon, laptop open, saying, "Mom, this is just the updated medical directive. Sign here and here, it's all digital now." I'd trusted her, not even asking to print a copy. I pressed my fingertips to the signature as if touch could prove authenticity. The ink didn't smudge. Kellen spoke carefully. "If this document is real, she owns the house." The words landed like stones. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The walls that had once sheltered me seemed to close in foreign and hostile. I set the papers back on the desk, aligning their edges with mechanical precision. My voice, when it came, was steady. "I'll need copies of every page." Kellen handed me the phone again. I took photos one by one, ensuring each seal and date was visible. The lens clicked rhythmically, like a metronome marking the tempo of disbelief. When I finished, I looked around the study, the empty shelves, the stripped desk, the soft outline of where the lamp had stood. The house felt drained of its pulse, yet strangely alert, as if listening. I placed the folder back exactly as I'd found it and closed the door behind me. Something inside me had shifted, grief narrowing into something colder, clearer. This wasn't only theft. It was erasure signed in my own hand. I stood at the foot of the staircase, Kellen's phone heavy in my palm. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I'll take it from here." He nodded, once eyes dark with understanding, and stepped back across the yard. When the door shut again, the quiet returned, thick, expectant. The home I'd built had turned into evidence, and I was no longer the woman who lived here, but the one who would prove she had. The night after I found the deed, I couldn't sleep. The house creaked and sighed around me, every sound unfamiliar, every shadow accusing. I sat in the kitchen, the deed of gift spread open under the small lamplight. My name, my careful looping script, was there as undeniable as breath. For hours I stared at it, trying to remember the moment my pen had moved across that line. And then, like a slow leak through a dam, the memory began to return. It was a Tuesday afternoon, 3 weeks before Lisbon. The light had been soft filtered through the lace curtains. Raya had come over with her laptop, smiling in that practiced way of hers, the one that suggested efficiency disguised as care. "Mom," she'd said, setting her toad on the kitchen table, "Dre and I talked about updating your medical directive. You know, in case anything ever happens while you're traveling. We can handle it online, it's easy now." She'd been so calm, so deliberate. I remember how her hair fell forward when she bent over the keyboard, how she glanced up at me with that sweet impatience children reserve for their aging parents. "It's all standard, Mom. Just sign here with your stylus there and there. It keeps me listed as your healthcare proxy. You trust me, right?" Of course I did. I'd trusted her with my childhood photographs, my savings, the jewelry box that was now empty. I'd trusted her to remember the smell of her father's aftershave, to know that this house was more than walls and wood. It was our history. She'd turned the laptop toward me. The text had been small, dense paragraphs of legal phrasing, scrolling faster than I could follow. "Nothing complicated," she'd said, brushing off my hesitation. "It's just to keep things organized. You hate paperwork, remember?" And I had laughed, weary and grateful. "You're a blessing, Raya. I'd drown in forms without you." The stylus was warm in my hand. I'd signed where she pointed. 2 signatures, one at the bottom, one at a digital pop-up she called a confirmation field. She'd smiled, kissed the top of my head, and said, "All done, Mom. You're set." The entire exchange had taken less than 5 minutes. Now, sitting alone at that same table, I saw the trick for what it was. My name wasn't attached to a medical directive, it was shackled to a deed. Every line, every flourish of ink, every loop of my signature was a weapon turned inward. I ran my fingers along the paper's edge the way one might test the blade of a knife. Cold realization settled through me, not the heat of anger, yet just precision. She had used my trust the way some people use light to blind before cutting. I folded the deed carefully, smoothing each crease until it looked harmless again. But I knew better. Paper can wound deeper than steel when the right hands guide the pen. I slipped the folder into my leather satchel, the same one I had carried through Lisbon, and whispered into the quiet, not as a plea, but as a vow. Not again. The refrigerator hummed softly, the only sound in the hollow house. I sat there until dawn, touched the window panes, knowing what had to come next. The betrayal was no longer a story I'd survived. It was evidence waiting to be answered. By morning, I was done with disbelief. Grief had burned off overnight, leaving only a clean, focused kind of fury. The deed sat on the kitchen table beside a cold cup of coffee. I didn't bother turning on the radio or the lights. I just sat there, waiting for business hours to begin. At 9 sharp, I called the only name that came to mind. Margot Lynn, a real estate attorney who'd helped a neighbor settle a boundary dispute years ago. Her receptionist sounded wary until I said, "It's urgent. My daughter stole my house using a falsified deed." There was a pause, then a new voice came on the line. Calm, crisp. "This is Margot. Bring the documents. Noon. Don't lose them." Her office was on the 3rd floor of an old brick building near downtown Evanston. The waiting area smelled faintly of lemon polish and rain. Through the frosted glass, I could see her silhouette, shoulders, square movements, deliberate. When she opened the door, I was startled by how direct her gaze was. Early 50s, close-cut hair, dark blazer. No pretense. She gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Tell me everything." I slid the folder across. She put on reading glasses and began to turn each page slowly, her brow tightening, but not surprised. She'd seen things like this before. When she finally looked up, she didn't waste words. "This," she said, "tapping the deed is fraud by misrepresentation. Your daughter misled you about what you were signing. Because you believed it was a medical directive, not a property transfer. The consent is invalid." I exhaled for what felt like the first time since Lisbon. "So I can take it back." "Not automatically. We'll need to file an emergency motion to invalidate the deed, arguing deception, undue influence, and breach of fiduciary duty. You'll also want to change your locks today. If they have keys, they can still enter before we serve notice." I nodded, absorbing every word. She continued, her tone almost clinical, but never unkind. "Keep records of everything, texts, receipts, even neighbors' statements. If you saw anyone move boxes, that's evidence of intent to assume possession. Courts care about patterns." Margot pulled a yellow legal pad toward her and began drafting notes, her pen moving fast. "Your advantage is timing. They don't know you're back. We can use that." Her matter-of-fact precision steadied me. I'd been drifting for days, adrift between betrayal and disbelief, but Margot's voice anchored me in the language of strategy of proof. She looked up briefly. "Do you have savings?" "You'll need a retainer, $5,000 minimum." "I'll pay it," I said, without hesitation. "Whatever it takes." Her lips curved into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Good. That kind of clarity wins cases." She organized the documents into a neat stack, clipped them, and handed me a copy of her contact sheet. "I'll draft the motion tonight. In the meantime, call a locksmith. Don't wait until tomorrow." As I stood to leave, she added, "One more thing, Ms. Hart. People think of law as cold. But in cases like yours, it's not about money, it's about reclaiming the narrative. You were written out of your own story. I helped put you back in it." Outside, the wind off Lake Michigan cut sharp against my face, but I welcomed it. It felt like air that belonged to me again. I walked straight to the hardware store and asked for the best locks they had. When the clerk asked if I'd just moved in, I almost laughed. "No," I said, gripping the box tightly. "I'm moving back." The locksmith arrived just after 4. He was a quiet man named Reese, broad-shouldered and steady, his gray van marked Evanston Secure and Key. When I explained what I needed, he didn't ask questions, only nodded once, businesslike. "Front, back, and side entry. All of them," I said. He pulled his toolkit from the van and got to work. Metal clicked and turned, each sound sharp and satisfying. For the first time in weeks, something in my world responded the way it should: cause and effect, problem and repair. I stayed near, watching the old locks fall away like brittle bones. "Good hardware," Reese said, sliding a new deadbolt into place. "Solid foundation. Just needed the right protection. The word protection made my throat tighten. He tested the bolt twice, handed me 3 keys, and said, "These are pick resistant. No copies unless you authorize." When he packed up, I paid him in cash and walked him to the door. The evening light had softened. The neighborhood hummed faintly with sprinklers and the far-off bark of a dog. Before leaving, Reese glanced at the porch, then at me. "You'll sleep better tonight," he said. "I will," I answered, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. After he left, I stood by the front door and turned the new key in the lock myself. The click was deep, certain. A sound that said, "Mine." The next task was order. I'd spent my career as an interior designer, planning, arranging, bringing structure to chaos. I decided to treat this like any Project Gather Facts label, everything, document every inch of proof that my life had been stolen, and I had taken it back. I cleared the dining table and laid out folders, pens, and a stack of legal pads I'd found in the study. On one label, I wrote, "Case H24, H for Hart." The number 24 was arbitrary, but it felt official enough, something to anchor me. I began by printing photos from Kellen's phone, each empty shelf, each missing piece. Then I transcribed notes, what day I returned, the time, what Kellen saw, what Margot had said about filing the motion. I logged receipts, the locksmith invoice, the retainer check stub, the plane ticket from Lisbon. Each page I slipped into its own clear sleeve, arranged by category. Somewhere between sorting and labeling, a strange calm took hold. Fear gave way to a precise kind of focus, as if my mind had finally found a rhythm it could trust. I wasn't just rebuilding safety. I was reclaiming authorship. When the house grew too quiet, I set up 2 small motion cameras, one above the front porch, light one near the back door. A neighbor's teenager, Mara, helped me mount them, her hands quick and sure. "My dad's a tech guy," she said. "You'll get alerts on your phone." I thanked her and handed her $20. She tried to refuse. "You're keeping me company," I said. "That's worth something." When she left, the street had settled into darkness. I checked the feed on my phone, 2 live images glowing softly. Both doors secure, both cameras steady. In the kitchen, I made tea and sat at the table beside my new file. The lamp threw a warm circle of light across the papers, softening the hard edges of evidence. Outside, wind brushed the trees. Somewhere in the distance, the train to Chicago rumbled faintly, constant and comforting. I reached out and laid my hand on the surface of the table, the same one where I'd once signed my life away, without reading the fine print. Now it held only truth, itemized and documented. The refrigerator hummed behind me. The clock on the wall ticked softly, patient and alive. I turned the key in my hand once more, felt its cool weight, and whispered into the stillness, "This house breathes again." The words felt solid, belonging to both the room and me. For the first time in a long while, the silence that followed wasn't threatening. It was peace, earned by vigilance, quiet, deliberate, and mine. 2 days later, the quiet broke. It was late afternoon, the kind of hour when the sun hung low and the world felt half asleep. I'd just finished organizing the second binder for Case H24, the papers aligned like soldiers waiting for orders. The house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and something else. Anticipation sharp and electric. Then came the sound I'd been expecting, a car door slamming, then another. Tires crunching against gravel. Voices. Through the sheer curtain, I saw them, Raya and Dre, standing in my driveway. Her hair pulled back, sunglasses perched on her head like armor. His posture, tight chin, lifted, as if already preparing an argument. The silver key in her hand glinted in the sunlight. I stayed still as she tried the front lock. Once. Twice. The key refused to turn. The metallic scrape carried across the porch. Her voice rose, irritated. "Dre, this isn't working." Did she change the locks? He muttered something low, then tried himself. The deadbolt clicked solidly, unmoved. I waited until the frustration deepened into silence, then opened the door. Slowly, deliberately. Raya flinched at the sound of the latch turning. "Oh," I said, calm and even. "You're back." I let the words rest there, the way one might set down a fragile glass between strangers. "I have a surprise for you." Her expression flickered confusion first, then calculation. "Mom. My God, we've been so worried. You disappeared in Lisbon. We thought I raised a hand." "No rehearsed stories, Raya. You'll want to save those for someone who hasn't already filed a case." Dre stepped forward, voice brittle. "You can't just change the locks. This is our house now. You signed it over." Behind my back, my phone was already recording the small red light glowing against my palm. "You mean the document you called a medical directive?" I said, meeting his eyes. "The one notarized in a coffee shop for $300 cash." Dre's mouth opened, then closed again. Raya's face hardened. "You don't understand, Mom. We were trying to protect you, to make sure the house stayed in the family, by abandoning me at an airport. She stopped searching for ground that didn't exist." I stepped aside just enough for them to see the dining table behind me. On it, neatly arranged the motion to void the deed police reports, time-stamped photos, and copies of the notarization log Margot had obtained. "You'll find it's all organized," I said softly. "Even the recordings." Raya's confidence faltered. Her fingers twitched around the useless key. "You can't prove intent." "I don't have to," I said. "The pattern proves it for me. Theft, misrepresentation, false notarization. Every word of this conversation is being documented. Washington is a two-party consent state, and I am one of them." Dre swore under his breath. Raya's face drained of color. "You went too far?" I continued, my voice steady, almost detached. "If you wanted the house, you could have asked. If you wanted security, I would have helped. But you wanted power, and you thought age would mean weakness." Raya's shoulders slumped, the performance dissolving. For the first time in months, I saw my daughter as she truly was, not clever, not cruel, just small. A frightened woman who had mistaken deception for survival. "Mom, please no." My voice was quiet but final. "From this point forward, we'll speak through counsel." I closed the folder, marked Evidence A, and set it aside. "You should go before I call the police. They already have your names on record." Dre tugged Raya's arm. "We're leaving." She hesitated on the porch, eyes searching mine for a trace of softness that no longer lived there. I didn't offer any. When the car finally reversed down the drive, I exhaled slowly, steadily. The silence that followed was heavy, but pure. I walked to the door, locked it, and turned the key once more, feeling the bolt slide home. The house held its breath for a moment, then settled, quiet, certain. Inside, I pressed stop on the recording and saved the file under a new label. Raya, confrontation, proof. In the reflection of the window, I saw myself not as the mother left behind in Lisbon, but as the woman who had come home and refused to disappear twice. By the following week, the first ripple of their retaliation arrived, not through the courthouse, but through the digital air that people now treat as gospel. Kellen came to my door mid-morning, holding his tablet like it contained bad news from a war neither of us had declared. "Maelin," he said carefully, "I think you should see this before someone else calls about it." The screen showed a public post on Raya's account. Her profile picture, a sunlit family portrait cropped to exclude me, hovered above a block of text written in the language of heartbreak and manipulation. "My mother's been struggling with confusion lately. We tried to help her manage her affairs, but she's turned on us. She changed the locks, accused us of theft, and is now spreading things that aren't true. Please, if you know her, keep her in your prayers. This isn't the woman I grew up with." Below it, a flood of comments. Sympathy, confusion. Some defending me, most not. People I hadn't spoken to in years weighed in with tidy condolences and long-distance concern. One read, "Poor Raya. Caretaking is so hard when parents decline." I stared at the words until the letters blurred, then handed the tablet back. My fingers felt oddly numb. Kellen exhaled. "Don't respond. Not one word." "I wasn't planning to," I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. He hesitated. "Robert Michaels, the lawyer's name, is showing up too. He filed something with the court yesterday. Motion for immediate possession. They're saying you're unlawfully occupying property you gifted to them." It shouldn't have surprised me, but it still felt like being punched without warning. "They're calling me a trespasser in my own home." "Margot will handle it," he said, "but she'll need to move fast." I nodded and went inside to call her. Margot answered on the second ring. "I saw the filing," she said before I could speak. "He's arguing elder confusion. Claims you misunderstood the legal process due to cognitive decline. It's strategic. If they can cast doubt on your mental clarity, they weaken your fraud claim." I sat down at the kitchen table. "He's turning my age into evidence." "Yes," she said simply. "That's what good opponents do, they weaponize perception. But it won't stand if we document your capacity. I'm scheduling a neurocognitive assessment this week. Independent, court certified, and the social media post." She sighed. "Ignore it. Public response looks defensive. Screenshots already archived as defamation evidence. Let them talk. We'll answer in court." Her efficiency steadied me. It reminded me of Amina's tone back in Lisbon, the same quiet certainty of someone used to pulling others from wreckage. "I'll be ready," I said. "Good. And Maelin," she added softer, "now don't read the comments. They're not written for truth. They're written for noise." After she hung up, I spent the afternoon in silence. I brewed tea I didn't drink. Outside wind chimes from Kellen's porch clinked faintly, a kind of rhythm against the emptiness. I could almost hear my husband's voice, the one that used to tell me not to take betrayal personally. It's about who they are, not who you are. But it felt personal now. Every word, every insinuation carved into the air under my name. Near sunset, I stepped into the garden. The dahlias had overgrown the walkway, their bright heads bobbing in the wind. I trimmed them carefully, letting the shears click in steady rhythm. Each cut made the world a little clearer, the path visible again. Kellen called across the fence. "Margot's good, isn't she?" "The best," I said. He nodded, eyes full of quiet understanding. "Then let her speak for you. Sometimes silence says more than shouting ever could." I looked back at the house, the one that had nearly slipped from my grasp, and felt its walls hold steady against the rising dark. Tomorrow, I would go to that evaluation. I would let the law and not rumor define my sanity. But tonight, the house needed no defense. It already knew who belonged inside. Margot called 2 days later. Her tone was different, measured, but edged with something close to satisfaction. "I think you'll want to meet my investigator," she said. "His findings may save us months in court." That afternoon, a man named Silas Penn arrived at my house. Late 50s, clean-shaven, wearing a navy jacket that had seen too many stakeouts. He moved with the unhurried calm of someone who noticed everything and spoke only when he had proof. He placed a slim folder on my dining table. "Ms. Hart," he said, "I work freelance with attorneys on fraud and property cases." Margot hired me to find the pattern. The pattern, I asked. Fraud always has one. Same footprints, different shoes. He opened the folder and slid a printed spreadsheet toward me. Rows of figures filled the page: credit card balances, minimum payments, late fees. 6 accounts, all under Raya Doyle's name. The numbers were impossible to misread. Every card was over the limit. "She's drowning," Silas said, matter-of-factly. 2 cards went into collections last winter. Another creditor threatened civil action. Her income's half of what it was 2 years ago, but spending went up. Designer furniture, a vacation in Maui, dinners that cost more than her rent. He turned another page, screenshots of emails, each message addressed to realtors in Chicago and the North Shore. Request for property evaluation. Confidential. No sign needed yet. They all reference your address, Silas said. She started contacting them 6 weeks before you left for Portugal. Described herself as the homeowner. Asked about selling quickly, all cash buyers preferred. The room felt smaller. I tried to keep my voice steady. Before I even left. He nodded. Before you even packed. Silas reached for the next sheet. There's more. Data broker search logs, pulled legally through subpoena. The IP address matches her home network. Look here. He pointed to a list of Google queries, each time-stamped and painfully specific. Can you sell a house with parents' names still on deed of gift versus quitclaim transfer difference? How to convince elderly parent to sign property form. What happens if someone abandons relative abroad? I read the last line twice, my stomach tightening. That one's dated 2 weeks before Lisbon. Yes, Silas said quietly. They planned it long before you boarded that plane. He closed the folder, leaving his hand resting on it as if guarding its weight. Motive isn't greed alone, he continued. It's survival instinct twisted wrong. They were cornered, too proud to ask for help, too desperate to stop lying. I looked past him toward the window. Outside, the garden lay still, sunlight caught in the glass like a photograph of peace I hadn't yet earned. She didn't just steal, I said softly. She rehearsed it. Silas nodded once. That's why it's so clean. Planned fraud looks like trust until it breaks. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound came from the clock ticking on the wall, steady as a pulse. When he finally stood to leave, he left the folder behind. Margot has everything backed up, he said. Keep this copy. Judges don't convict on emotion, they convict on motive, timeline, and proof. You've got all 3 now. I walked him to the door. The air outside smelled faintly of rain. The first drops darkened the porch steps. Thank you, I said. Silas adjusted his jacket. You built a good case by surviving, Ms. Hart. We just gave it shape. After he left, I sat with the folder in my lap. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the roof in steady rhythm. Each page inside felt heavier than paper confession, by proxy, written in numbers, searches, and need. I thought of Raya sitting at her laptop months ago, typing each desperate question, convinced no one would ever read them. She had tried to make survival look like love, and now, on paper, love looked like motive. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper disinfectant and nerves. I had dressed simply gray slacks, pressed blouse hair tied back. Not armor, but order. Across the aisle, Raya sat beside her lawyer, Robert Michaels, the man who had turned family into litigation. She wore a beige suit, too large for her shoulders, and a face that wouldn't meet mine. Judge Renata Klein entered without preamble. 60-ish, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who had built her authority brick by brick. She didn't posture or raise her voice. The room quieted as naturally as water settling in a glass. Margot rose first. Your Honor, we submit evidence establishing fraudulent misrepresentation in the transfer of property owned by my client, Maelin Hart. She handed over 2 thick folders. Each thud against the clerk's desk sounded like a heartbeat. Michaels countered smoothly. Your Honor, my clients acted with full transparency. Mrs. Hart executed a lawful deed of gift, witnessed and notarized. The supposed confusion stems from age-related cognitive decline, not deceit. The word decline hit like a dart. I didn't look at Raya, but I could feel her flinch. Judge Klein flipped through the first folder. I've reviewed preliminary filings. There's allegation of improper notarization cash payment to notary and misrepresentation of document purpose. Is that correct? Margot nodded. Yes, Your Honor. The notary, Frank Morrison, has submitted a sworn affidavit confirming he was misled by the defendants. We request a forensic review of both the digital and physical signatures. The judge turned a page expression unreadable. Motion granted. The court orders a forensic document analyst to verify authenticity of the signatures, digital trail, and metadata. Both parties will cooperate. Any interference will be considered contempt. Her gaze shifted to Raya. Mrs. Doyle. You understand. Raya's reply was barely audible. Yes, Your Honor. Dre sat stiff beside her, his knee bouncing beneath the table rhythm, betraying composure. When the judge's eyes swept toward him, he froze. Margot rested her hand lightly on my arm, a quiet signal to breathe. We'll win by patience, she murmured under her breath. Michael stood again. Your Honor, we'd also request that possession remain with my clients during the proceedings given their financial dependency and the deed's current validity. Margot didn't rise this time. She simply said, Objection. Possession by fraud is not lawful possession. Judge Klein tapped her pen once. Objection sustained. The property remains with Ms. Hart until the court determines otherwise. I felt something uncoil in my chest. A small release, not victory, but reprieve. As the hearing wound down, the clerk gathered the files, and Klein set a new date. 2 weeks, she said. Both parties will reconvene after the forensic review. Court adjourned. The gavel struck wood. A clean sound final in its simplicity. Outside the hallway buzzed with voices, lawyers conferring heels echoing against marble. I waited near the exit while Margot spoke with the clerk, collecting copies of the court order. Raya passed me on her way out, her perfume faint but familiar. She didn't glance my way, though her hand brushed the doorframe as if she needed its balance. Dre followed jaw tight, pretending control. The act was fraying. When Margot joined me, she smiled faintly. That went better than it looked. It looked like a lifetime in 40 minutes, I said. She nodded. That's the nature of law. It moves slow, but it moves. We stepped outside into the gray Chicago air. The courthouse loomed behind us, solid and indifferent. I buttoned my coat and felt the weight of patience settle on my shoulders, not heavy, just necessary. The truth was now in motion, slow and mechanical, but it was moving toward daylight. The appointment was set for a Tuesday morning in a low-rise medical office on Ridge Avenue, with too much glass and not enough warmth. The sign on the door read, Dr. Lillian Cortez, Forensic Neuropsychology. Margot had arranged it after the defense filed their motion, questioning my mental capacity, an insult disguised as due diligence. Inside, everything smelled faintly of antiseptic and printer toner. Dr. Cortez greeted me herself, her tone neutral but kind. She was in her late 40s, hair pulled into a braid streaked with silver. Mrs. Hart, thank you for coming in. This is standard in cases alleging cognitive confusion. I just need you to be yourself. That, I said, is exactly what they're afraid of. She smiled, professional but genuine. Let's begin. The test lasted nearly 2 hours. Memory, reasoning, attention, each section designed to measure what the opposition wanted to erase. She read me lists of words and asked me to repeat them back, gave me puzzles to complete, patterns to identify, arithmetic to solve without paper. I could feel decades of design work, the structure, the symmetry, the need for order waking up in my hands. When she asked me to recall all the words she'd listed earlier, I said them in order, then alphabetically. Her pen stopped halfway through. At one point, she asked me to explain the meaning of a proverb, a house divided cannot stand. I looked at her and said, it means that when you let betrayal move into your home, it pays rent with silence. She didn't respond immediately, only wrote something on her clipboard. Near the end, she asked me to tell her about my daily routine. I file legal documents, take photographs of evidence, maintain chronological logs, I said. Sometimes I garden when it's not raining. It helps me think. Dr. Cortez looked up. That's quite structured. Structure is survival, I answered simply. When it was over, she closed her folder and offered me water. Mrs. Hart, I'm not permitted to discuss formal results until the report is submitted to the court, but off record, you're sharper than most of my graduate interns. Whatever confusion they're claiming doesn't exist here. I smiled, small and tired. I'm old, not confused. She nodded. I'll make sure the record reflects that distinction. That afternoon, Margot called. Dr. Cortez sent a preliminary note to the court. Full cognitive function, no impairment. The judge will see it tomorrow. Michaels won't like it. I pictured him, his polished shoes, his smooth voice fraying just slightly as his strategy collapsed. Good, I said. At dusk, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea and watched the neighborhood settle into evening. Kellen waved from his yard. I waved back. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed its rhythm steady and sure. They had tried to make me a question mark. Instead, I'd become a statement, quiet, deliberate, and irrefutable. When Margot called again the next morning, her voice held something close to satisfaction. Michaels tried to object to the evaluation, she said. Judge Klein reminded him that facts, unlike rumors, don't waver. I looked around my living room, the house that once felt stolen, and felt something inside me realign. My mind was intact, my resolve sharper than ever. If they wanted a fight over reality, I'd already won. The truth arrived not as thunder, but as paperwork. Margot called just after dawn, her voice steady, but edged with anticipation. We've got something, she said. Barton Lyle, the notary, listed on your deed. He came forward. I was sitting by the kitchen window, steam curling from my coffee. Why would he? He was subpoenaed for deposition this week. Turns out conscience can outrun cash, at least when the police start calling. By mid-morning, we were back in Judge Klein's courtroom. Barton Lyle sat at the witness table, a narrow man in his 40s with a thin mustache and the look of someone who'd aged faster than his years. He clutched his statement like a shield. Michaels tried to guide him gently. Mr. Lyle, you notarized a deed of gift for Mrs. Hart, correct? Barton cleared his throat. Yes, sir. And she appeared in person before you. A pause. Then quietly, not exactly. The judge lifted her eyes. Explain, not exactly. Barton's voice wavered. Raya Doyle and her husband met me at a Starbucks off Ridge Avenue. Said her mother had mobility issues, couldn't leave home easily. They paid me $300 cash to verify a signature that had already been made. The courtroom stilled. Even the air seemed to hesitate. You falsified the acknowledgement, Judge Klein asked evenly. Yes, ma'am, Barton said, swallowing hard. I justified it to myself at the time. They looked sincere. Said it was family business. I didn't ask questions. He took a breath, trembling. But I kept the text messages and the receipt from the payment. I've turned them over to the police. Michaels shifted the color draining from his face. Raya sat rigid beside him, her hands gripping the edge of the table until her knuckles blanched. Margot stood. Your Honor, we request immediate forensic examination of those messages, as well as any related storage or property connected to this fraud. Granted, Klein said. Proceed. 2 days later, the search warrant came through. Officers from the Evanston Police Department, accompanied by Silas Penn, raided a storage facility registered under Dre Doyle's name. The inventory list was almost surgical antique silver set engraved MRH, one digital Nikon camera, and a gold wristwatch inscribed, to M for every hour I loved you. When the call came confirming recovery, I didn't speak. I simply closed my eyes and exhaled. Objects, yes, but also proof. At the next hearing, the evidence sat neatly displayed in clear plastic bags on the clerk's desk. Barton Lyle was recalled, his affidavit entered into record. Raya avoided my gaze, but I saw her reflection in the polished table, the faint tremor in her jaw, the twitch beneath one eye. The arrogance that had once defined her had evaporated, leaving behind something brittle and unfamiliar. Judge Klein reviewed the documents in silence. This court finds substantial evidence of fraudulent notarization, intent to deceive, and unlawful transfer of property, she said finally. Motion to void deed is approved pending formal verdict. All assets shall remain in Ms. Hart's possession. The gavel struck once firm and echoing. Michaels leaned toward Raya, whispering something that didn't reach her. Dre stared straight ahead, his confidence unraveling thread by thread. Margot's hand found mine. "It's not over yet," she said softly. "But we just turned the tide." Outside the courthouse, the air was clear, the sky wide and unburdened. For the first time since Lisbon, I felt the shape of justice, not triumph, but equilibrium. Back home, I placed the recovered watch on the mantel, its glass catching the afternoon light. It ticked softly steady as breath measuring time not lost, but reclaimed. In another room, my phone buzzed, Margot confirming the next court date. I silenced it and stood still, listening to the faint rhythm of the clock that had once been mine. The seal had slipped, and truth had stepped through. Whether it would heal or burn, only time would tell. But at last it was out in the open, and it bore my name. The final hearing fell on a cold Monday morning in late November. The courthouse steps were slick with rain, the kind that made everything smell faintly of iron and earth. Inside, the air was heavy with that quiet anticipation. Only verdict days carry the stillness before a door closes for good. Raya and Dre sat at their table, both looking smaller than I remembered. She wore black, perhaps out of calculation, perhaps out of guilt. Dre's tie was crooked, his hands restless. Michaels shuffled papers with a kind of mechanical precision, but even he seemed to sense which way the wind was blowing. Margot leaned over to me before the session began. "Today's not about winning," she said. "It's about ending." Judge Klein entered promptly at 9. Her robe swayed as she took her seat, eyes scanning the room with practiced neutrality. When she spoke, her tone was firm, but not unkind. "This court has reviewed the forensic report, the notary's sworn confession, and the financial evidence presented over the past month. The findings are clear." She paused, letting the quiet stretch, until even the clock seemed to hold its breath. "The deed of gift transferring ownership from Maelin Hart to Raya Doyle is hereby voided in full on grounds of fraud, coercion, and falsified notarization. Ownership of the property returns to Ms. Hart effective immediately." Raya's breath hitched audibly. Dre closed his eyes, his shoulders collapsing inward. Judge Klein continued, voice steady as stone. "The court also refers this case to the state's attorney for criminal review under Title 720, fraudulent transfer, and elder financial exploitation. Restitution is ordered for all items removed from the Hart residence, as well as repayment of investigative costs. This judgment shall be entered into the public record." The gavel struck once, the sound precise and final. Margot's pen stopped moving. For a moment, she said nothing, just pressed her lips together, eyes softening. "It's done," she whispered. Across the aisle, Raya sat rigid, her expression unreadable, shock blurred with disbelief, perhaps shame. When she finally turned toward me, I expected anger. Instead, her gaze held something quieter, emptier. Recognition maybe of a line she could never step back across. Dre muttered to Michaels, who nodded grimly. They gathered their papers, their gestures sharp and hurried, as if retreat could rewrite what had just been said aloud. Margot stood and extended her hand toward me. "Let's go," she said gently. "The rest will move through the system now." We walked together through the echoing hallway. Reporters waited outside the courtroom doors, cameras raised, but Margot cut through them with a single glance that said, "Not today." I followed her past the marble columns, past the smell of wet pavement, into the open air. Rain had slowed to a mist. I drew a long breath, the kind that felt both strange and necessary. It didn't taste like victory, just space. When I reached home, the brass key turned cleanly in the lock. Inside, the air was warm again. I set my coat on the rack, looked around at the furniture restored to its rightful place, and felt the kind of quiet that belongs only to those who have fought too long. Justice had come not roaring, but steady, deliberate. It hadn't filled the emptiness, but it had cleared the air enough for something new to grow there. I exhaled once more. Not triumph, just release. Spring arrived in quiet colors that year. The snow melted slower than usual, as if the earth itself needed time to let go. The trial had ended months earlier. The headlines had faded, replaced by new scandals, new storms. What remained were the smaller truths, the kind that linger when the noise dies down. Raya was serving her probation term under court supervision. Her travel restricted, her accounts frozen. Dre had left the state entirely. No one knew where, and I hadn't asked. Some absences deserved to remain unanswered. Life after so much chaos became astonishingly simple. Mornings meant tea on the porch, with the paper folded beside me. Evenings meant the soft hum of the radio and the steady rhythm of an ordinary day. There were no lawyers, no hearings, no signatures to fear. Only space wide and quiet enough for breathing again. In February, I met with Margot one last time to finalize my estate documents. Her office smelled of jasmine tea and printer ink, familiar and calm. I want to change the will, I told her. Her pen paused midair. How so? The house stays in Evanston, but not as inheritance. I want it donated to the Elder Haven Trust, a program for housing independent seniors. They can turn it into a residence or sell it to fund care grants. Either way, it belongs to people who understand consent and kindness. Margot studied me for a long moment before smiling. A poetic kind of justice, she said. You're sure, I'm sure, I said. It's never really been about ownership. It's about stewardship. By April, the legal transfer was complete. The deed, ironically, the same document that had nearly destroyed me, now bore a new clause, signed in my hand, witnessed and sealed in proper ink. One evening, Kellen came over carrying a small box. Found this at the crafts market, he said. Inside lay a brass plaque, smooth and gleaming, engraved in simple serif letters, "Home by consent only." He helped me hang it just beside the front door. We measured twice, adjusted once. When it caught the late sunlight, it shone like quiet defiance made permanent. As we stepped back to look, Kellen gave a low whistle. Looks right, he said. It feels right, I replied. We stood in silence for a while, the kind of silence that holds more comfort than conversation. The wind from the lake carried the faint scent of lilac across the yard. The house, once scarred by deceit, seemed to exhale at last, its walls lighter, its presence. Human again. Later that night, I sat at my desk and looked over the last page of my journal. The ink shimmered faintly under the lamp as I wrote the final line. They tried to take what I owned. Instead, they taught me what I am. I closed the book gently, aligning it beside the binder, labeled Case H24. Both belonged to the past, now each in its own way. A record of survival. Outside, the brass plaque caught the moonlight, a soft gleam against the blue of the siding. The house was no longer a fortress or a prize. It was simply what it had always meant to be, a place where presence required permission, where love could return only by choice. I turned off the lamp, letting the quiet fill the room. For the first time in years, it felt like home.